understand, are not testifying before the subcommittee, Mr. Jackie Stump, who is the Secretary of District 28, and also Mr. Minus Pridemore, who is an inter...
Now, what you want to show that just for, should I explain why we're showing it? All right. This first is just a little background on the whole thing here now. One of the ways I got interested in this, and I guess what prompted me to really stimulated my interest, I went into a motel room one night, turned on television, and someone was being sawed in half in living color by a chainsaw. And it bothered me that night, and I thought, what happens to a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old who sees something like this? Now, this is, it is obviously cable rather than network, but it got me interested in the whole problem, and we'll just show a couple of scenes, and these are not the worst scenes, I might add, from that. I did not see the worst scenes.
We'll have that for reviewing later.
Okay, I guess you're not going to see it now. Oh, you have played it already for him. Oh, okay. Let me, by way of background, tell you a little of where we are in this nation and what I am proposing. We have reports from the Surgeon General of the United States, from the National Institute of Mental Health, from the American Academy of Pediatrics, from the American Psychological Association, all of which say we're seeing too much violence on television for our own mental health, particularly the mental health of children. The Screen Actors Guild has passed a resolution expressing concern about this problem. There are all kinds of things that could be mentioned. Among the things research has shown is that children become less sensitive to the pain and suffering of others. They become more fearful of the world around them and become more likely to behave in an aggressive or harmful way toward others. Following the showing of one movie, 35 boys and young men ages 8 to 31 killed themselves playing Russian roulette. I visited the facilities in Los Angeles, had a little interesting experience because I didn't know how to go from network to network out there. I'm not that familiar with the Los Angeles area. I asked for a car and a driver. It so happened the driver was a woman from Sweden who got talking about violence and said, we don't permit any of the violence. They permit more nudity, but none of the violence that we permit on Swedish television. And shortly after that, you may remember that Olof Palme was killed on the streets of Sweden. And the newspaper report that this is the first Swedish citizen that police records have being killed on the street, not public official, the first Swedish citizen. Now, I don't suggest that violence on TV is the sole or the major cause of that, but we have accustomed ourselves to violence to much too great an extent. Tests show clearly that adults who watch TV a lot greatly exaggerate in their estimates of how much crime takes place. They also have much greater fear of crime. Television can appeal to the best in us or the worst in us. And to too great an extent, we are tolerating television appealing to the worst in us. Now, how do we handle this, and handle it in such a way that someone who is a civil libertarian, as I am, can move ahead on what is a problem? We have two bills here. One says the networks will not be violating antitrust laws by getting together and adopting guidelines. The networks, cable, and the independents getting together and adopting guidelines for violence. And the second is to ask the FCC to look into this and report back what could be done. That's basically where we are. Yes. Well, it bothered me. I'm 57 years old. I was not 57. I was probably 56 or maybe 55. I can't remember. But it bothered me as an adult. What happens to a 12-year-old who watches something like that? And I think we have to ask those questions. And we have not been asking those questions.
Well, I'm not certain exactly what I think you want to accomplish, whether you want some kind of warning system so parents can help children find appropriate material, whether you think networks ought to agree on what kind of restraints they have. And you've shown us an example of a film that you admit is not network television. Do you have examples of what you do object to on network television, something more relevant?
There is no question that network television also contains too much violence, and the evidence from the studies is overwhelming. There's only one study which doesn't indicate there is no harm, but is inconclusive, and that was a study that was authorized by NBC. When I met with the network people here, and this was 3 or 4 months ago, in my office, one of them said there is this study showing there is no harm, and I said it reminded me of my friends in the Tobacco Institute who come in and point out they have research that shows that cigarettes have no harm. All the other research is on the other side. Now, as to what I want, I'm leaving this up to the networks, to independents, to cable. I think ideally they could adopt certain guidelines, for example, that no one commits suicide playing Russian roulette, just as one example. There shouldn't be any difficulty in that. I think there's some obvious things that they ought to be able to get together and decide upon. They may want to have warnings also. I don't know. I haven't seen it, but I understand ABC has an excellent public service announcement telling parents, watch television with your children. I think it's a great thing. I think there are positive things that networks and cable and the independents can do.
So you had originally talked in terms of, when you were still in the drafting stages, of some legislation that would require advisories. This seems to be sort of a watered-down version. What prompted you to back away?
Well, I'm not sure that's the ideal answer. I think ideally, rather than warnings, is simply removing some things from the screen. And warnings don't remove some things from the screen. I think the best thing is for the networks and cable and the independents to get together with the experts and say, what can we do to improve what takes place in the living rooms of America?
Senator, have the program executive said to you that if we didn't have this antitrust problem, we would get together and do this? This is what's between us?
I can't say that they have said that. I think if we pass this legislation, that is a clear signal to the networks that that is the desire of Congress and the American people.
But there's no, I understand the difficulty with it, but there's no incentive to do it. There's no disincentive not to do it. It would seem that if they wanted it off, they would individually take it off. You feel that it's competitive pressures?
I believe that competitive pressures force the continued violence on television. And if everyone agrees we're going to adopt certain standards, then no one can gain financially by having too much violence on television. Well, what we do know is the public doesn't want as much violence as we have in our society. The public wants less crime in our society. And I think the evidence is overwhelming that we can modify our behavior by having television appeal to the best in us instead of the worst in us.
Is there any evidence, though, that the public wants less violence on TV?
The public probably wants, as the public wants, both more services and lower taxes, but they don't like the end result of that. There is unquestionably demand for violence. At the same time, they want less of the results of violence. Yes? I don't see how they can.
Senator, do you take heart that several of the most popular programs right now in prime time have to do with family situations and
Yes, there is no question we can have good, wholesome, solid entertainment that people watch, like The Cosby Show, that does not contain violence. There are some great examples on television, and we need more of those.
Does your criticism of excess extend to news broadcasts, including those that show, for instance, the bodies of children in Libya?
No, and this, I'm glad you asked that question, because there is an important distinction between violence on the news and violence in entertainment. Violence in the news, the innocent and the guilty are the victims. Violence in entertainment, it is almost always the bad guys, the people you don't identify with, who get hurt. And that is, that's conveying something very, very different to people who watch television.
Do you have any examples of network broadcasting other than the Russian roulette and teenagers playing Russian roulette? Examples that you feel are in excess?
The people who are the experts in this area do have examples. I don't claim to be an expert.
Senator, here's the thing. I understand the difficulties involved with it. If you take it off of, let's say you get the network executives to get together and talk about it. When you talk about cable, here you have competitors who are putting this stuff on the air for what we call narrowcast. That is, it appeals to a certain number of people, and they're going to go there for it. But you see that if you, to a certain extent, you remove it from the networks, everybody who's looking for this stuff is going to go right to cable. What's the incentive for cable operators, for producers, and so on and so forth, to go in and talk to the networks? What do they care?
Well, number one, our bill includes cable, and we don't mandate anything at this point. I spoke to the cable convention in Dallas 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, whenever it was, and I sensed a yearning on the part of a lot of cable executives for this kind of thing. They're unhappy with what's happening now, but they feel competitively they're forced into this situation. And I'm not fooling myself that we're going to completely eliminate all that's harmful on that screen. But if we can reduce it appreciably, it's a great service to the American public. Yes?
The FCC has never been particularly amenable to content information.
I don't know what they're going to do, but they are creatures of Congress, just like every other governmental entity, and they have to do what we tell them to do.
You describe yourself as a civil libertarian. How does that side of you tug against the argument that there ought to be some restraint?
Well, I'm a former member of the State Board of the American Civil Liberties Union in Illinois. I am not proposing censorship here. What I am proposing is that the networks and cable and the independents get together and voluntarily, recognizing the harm that is now being done, that they voluntarily do something to clean this situation up. Thank you.
Also, Senator Thurman, the chairman of the committee, the bill we referred to as a co-sponsor.
You want me to watch it?
We want you to watch it. Yeah.
All right. And incidentally, there is a worse scene that I have to say I did not see, but they tell me the worst was this one.
This is Arkansas massacre?
Yes. And copyright laws do permit fair use of limited segments.
Violent after watching this?
Very, I'm really taking it.
Can you tell how it's in the center?
It's a symbol.
It's the center there. Is there anyone else close by?
Senator Thurman initiative.
Impact on the ability of coal miners to go back to work, at least some coal miners to go back to work?
I definitely believe so, because if that was to take place, it would definitely put the American coal mine